So I want to talk to you about long division. Well, we're going to divide polynomials, and polynomials are just any of these functions that have whole number powers, like that are positive, like x to the fourth and x to the third. So when we're going to divide those, kind of like the one you see over here is a 2x cubed minus 3x squared plus 4x plus 5. That's a polynomial. X plus 2 is a polynomial. Well, to divide stuff like that, we're going to take a stroll down memory lane and go back to elementary school. If you remember, think of about 4th grade. When you divided, you put the number you were dividing by out front. You made your little division bar. You wrote the number you were dividing into here. And then we divided, and this was our quotient. And then we looked for, there was hopefully a remainder was 0, but it doesn't always have to be. So let's just review that. The way we divided, we said, okay, how many times does 13 go into 49? We said, oh, that was 3. And then we multiplied that and put 3 times 13 was 39, and then we subtracted. 49 minus 39 is 10, and then we brought down the next number. And then we said, okay, how many times will 13 go into 101? And if I remember correctly, that's 8. 8 times 3 is 24. And, oops, not 8. I guess that's going to be a 7. Let's see if I did that. I'll double check. So if we say 7, 7 times 3 is 21. And so that's 91. And 101 minus 91 is 10. And we brought down the next number, which is 6. So how many times, well, 8, the number I tried to do was 104. So 8 times 3 is 24. Carry the 2. 8 plus 2 is 10. 104, which was a remainder of 2, or not 2, not a remainder, but then that was a 2 we brought down, or subtracted and got 2, sorry. Then brought down the 3. How many times will 13 go into 23? Well, 13 times 2 is 26, so just once. 1 times 13 is 13. Subtract. 23 minus 13 is 10 again. Bring down the 7, and that was an 8, and so 13 times 8 was 104. And subtract those, and we got a remainder of 3. So it was 37,818 with a remainder of 3. And another way you could write that is 37,818 plus 3/13. So that's more than one way to write it. Sometimes you'll see it written as 37,818 as a quotient and the remainder of 3. Sometimes you'll see it written like this. Well, for polynomials, we're usually going to write it as a fraction. So that was one of the things that was the process. Well, we're going to do that exact same process. The only difference is we're going to do it with polynomial functions instead of numbers. So let's look at this example here. Let me scroll up a little more so you, oh, yep, so if I go to the very top, we say, okay, how many times, and all you have to look at is this first number. How many times will x go into 2x cubed? Or another way I like to say it is, what can we multiply by x that'll give us 2x cubed? And you can also say, okay, 2x cubed divided by x is going to be 2x squared. So we put a 2x squared up here in the first box. And then we multiply it just like we did with numbers. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to make that mark. We multiplied that number to both of these. So 2x squared times x was 2x cubed. And then 2x squared times 2 was 4x squared. And then once you write that, put a parentheses around it and subtract. You need the parentheses so that you remember, because we have to change that sign and then change that sign. These should always subtract out. If you didn't, you messed up. Here you'll have negative 3x squared minus 4x squared, which is a negative 7x squared. And then you bring down the next term, which was a 4x. Then you say, okay, what? And if you'll notice where we wrote this was, it was the x squared term, so we put it above the x squared. So so it should follow along, and everything keeps matching up. And x will be above the x, and the whole number will be above the whole number here. So we look at what times x will give me this first term, and the first term was this negative 7x squared. Or another way to describe that is negative 7x squared divided by x is what? Well, that'll be negative 7x. So we put a negative 7x here, which is what we've done on this step, and then we multiply those. Negative 7x times x is negative 7x squared. Negative 7x times 2 is a negative 14x, but we have to distribute the signs, which makes it this makes this positive, which cancels those out, and makes this a positive 14, which makes this 18x. And so then we say, okay, 18x divided by x will give you a positive 18. So we write that term, and then we multiply that. Oh, I forgot to bring down the 5, didn't I, when I talked about that. Bring down the 5, and so we look at, okay, 18x divided by x would just be 18. So we put a plus 18, and now we multiply x times 18 and 2 times 18, which is 36. And our remainder was negative 31. So now that I kind of fumbled my way through that, let's do it with real numbers where it's not all pre-filled in. So I'm going to clear this off. So I have first thing we want to do is we're going to make our divide bar, just like elementary school, and put x cubed plus 4x squared minus 3x minus 12 inside the divide bar. Out front, we're dividing by x minus 3. Okay. So one way to look at it is what times x gives you x cubed? Or, what's easier for a lot of people, x cubed divided by x would be what? Well, that'd be just a 1x squared. So I'm going to write it above the x squared. Then we say x squared times x, and that's going to be x cubed. And then x squared times negative 3 would be a negative 3x squared. Now we're going to subtract that. This should always go away. 4x squared, and the biggest mistake is this sign right here for people. 4x squared minus a negative 3x squared. So what a lot of times I'll tell people to do is change your signs right off the bat, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So that makes this 7x squared. Bring down the next term, which is a negative 3x. And then what times x gives you 7x squared? Or the second way to look at this, 7x squared divided by x is a positive 7x to the first. Now that we know what term that is, multiply that to both of them. 7x times x is 7x squared. 7x times negative 3 is a negative 21x. And now I'm going to subtract those. And when I subtract those, that makes this one negative and this one positive. And so now I don't have to worry about subtraction, and it's just addition. So that went away. That becomes 18x. And bring down the last term, which is a negative 12. Watch out for these signs. 18x divided by x is just a positive 18. So now that we know that, we multiply it back out and say 18 times x is 18x. 18 times 3 is 54, and it's a positive times a negative, so it's a negative 54. Then you got to remember to subtract, so that's going to change this to negative and this to positive. And then it's no longer a subtraction because I changed all my signs. And that becomes 0. 54 minus 12 is 42. So we end up with the remainder of 42. So a lot of times you'll write your answer and say, oh, plus 42 over x minus 3. That's the most common way to write this. Sometimes they'll just ask, what's the remainder? And then you would say, oh, the remainder was 42. There's our answer to number 1. Let's try this one more time. And this one, I need to point out a couple things to you. Notice, here's an x squared. Here's an x to the 4th. Here's a 41. We're missing stuff, and it's not in the right order. And I forgot to mention that up above, but we always want to have it in the right order, or else it's just way too complicated. It won't work right if you don't put it in the right order. So we're going to put it in the right order, and I'm also going to put a 0 for any missing term. So we have x to the 4th. Next should be an x cubed. There's not one, so I'm going to say plus 0x cubed. And then next would be an x squared, which is a 5x that was positive, so I'm going to say plus 5x squared. There's no x term, so plus 0x and then minus 41. And we're dividing by x minus 2. So the first term, x to the 4th divided by x, would be x cubed. So I'm going to put it above the x cubed. And now I multiply those out. X cubed times x is x to the 4th, and then minus 2x cubed. And we're going to subtract those. So I always put that in the parentheses, so I'll remember to change all my signs. This becomes negative, this becomes positive. That went to 0, which means I did it right. This becomes 2x cubed. Bring down the next term, which is a positive 5x squared. 2x cubed divided by x is a positive 2x squared. So now we multiply. 2x squared times x is 2x cubed. 2x squared times negative 2 is negative 4x squared. Subtract those, which means change that to negative and that to positive, and that goes to 0, and that gives you 9x squared. Bring down the next term, which was a 0x, and 9x squared divided by, all you have to do is look at the first one. 9x squared divided by x is a positive 9x. And now multiply it. 9x times x is 9x squared. 9x times negative 2 is a negative 18x. Subtract, which means change that to negative, that to positive. Gone, and 0 plus 18x is 18x. Bring down the last term, which is a negative 41. 18x divided by x is a positive 18. So that multiply those together. 18 times x is 18x. 18 times negative 2 is a negative 36. We're going to subtract, because when you divide, you always subtract after you multiply. So that makes that negative and that positive, and it's no longer a minus out front then. 36 minus 41 is a negative 5. So this is plus a negative 5, or easier just say minus 5 over x minus 2. And here is our quotient and our whole function, what's left. Okay, let's move on to number 3. So for number 3, this one, we're doing still a division. It's just written as a fraction this time. But you notice we have an x squared. There's no x term. So inside my divide house, the dividend, I believe is what that's called in math terms, x squared plus 0x minus 28, and we're dividing by x minus 5. So take the first term, x squared divided by x is 1x. So I'm just going to put an x up here, and now multiply. X times x is x squared. X times negative 5 is negative 5x. Whoops, didn't mean to put that. We're going to put my parentheses, subtract, which makes that negative and that positive, and now I'm adding them. And that gives me 5x minus 28. 5x divided by x is a positive 5. So 5 times x is 5x. 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. Subtract, which means change your signs. And that becomes negative 3. So we say minus 3 over x minus 5. If it's a remainder, it has to have what you're dividing by in front. Okay. Last one, number 4. This is not in the correct order. X cubed is the highest term. So inside my divide, we're going to have x cubed minus 5x squared plus 8x plus 4. And we're dividing by, this one's written backwards too. I'd write that as x minus 1. So x minus 1. X cubed divided by x is a positive x squared. X squared times x is x cubed. X squared times negative 1 is a negative x squared. Parentheses, subtract, which means change that to a minus and that to a plus, and then add them. That's 0. That is negative 4x squared. Bring down the next term, which is 8x. Negative 4x squared divided by x is a negative 3x, or what times x gives you negative 4x squared? What am I doing? That's not a negative 3x. Negative 4x squared divided by x is negative 4x, or what times x will give you negative 4x squared? What's a negative 4x? So now we multiply and say negative 4x squared plus 4x, because it's negative 4x times negative 1. Subtract, which means change that to a plus and that to a minus. Add those together, goes to 0. 8 minus 4 is 4x. Bring down the last term, which is a plus 4. 4x divided by x is a positive 4. So 4 times x is 4x. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. Subtract those two. And looks like that becomes a negative, that becomes a positive. Add them together, you get a remainder of 8. So plus 8 over x minus 1. And we're through with long division, so now let's talk about synthetic division. Oh, I should have turned the page. I've got to smooth this. Let's adjust this. There we go. Sorry. I have to scroll that a little so I can... Okay. So, a faster way to do long division, when you have a polynomial that's divided by just a binomial that's x minus a number, in the form of x minus a number, so if it's not a minus, that lets us know that we need to rewrite it. We can take just that number we're dividing by, put it out front, and list just the coefficients. And I'll walk you through this step. You're right. So this one was a 2x cubed minus 5x squared minus 8x plus 3. So we put a 2, a negative 5, a negative 1, and a 3. And then we put just the number. Since this was x plus 3, that's x minus negative 3. So we want a minus in the formula. So it's always the opposite of what you see. So we're going to put a negative 3 out front. And then the process for synthetic division, bring down the first term, and then multiply. 2 times negative 3, put that underneath the next term. Add those together, multiply, put that into the next term, and repeat that process. And you'll get the same results as if we had done long division. So, first thing I'm going to do is look at this problem. I want to put it in order. The highest power is x to the 4th. It has a negative 1. So I'm going to put inside this box, and you'll see different types of boxes. Some people will actually use, some textbooks will use the normal division and just put the coefficients. But I'm going to put negative 1 because that's the x to the 4th term. Then comes the x cubed term, which is a negative 2. Then the x squared term, which is a positive 3. The x term is 4. And then the last term is negative 4. If any terms are missing, you have to put a 0, but they were all there. And it's x plus 2, so I'm going to divide by negative 2. You call it divide, but you actually don't divide for synthetic division. What you do is you always bring down the first term, negative 1. Multiply. Negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. You put that underneath the second term and then you add. So bring down a 0, because negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Multiply. Bring down a 3 when you add those. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. Add those two together. 4 plus negative 6 is negative 2. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. And you get a remainder of 0 on this one. So what this is the same thing if we had done long division. We would have gotten, since this was x to the 4th, this is always 1 power less. So this will be x cubed. So it's negative 1x cubed, or negative x cubed, plus 0x squared, plus x, and then minus 2. So I don't have to write a 0x squared. So positive 3, so plus 3x minus 2. Here's what we would have gotten if we had done long division. That's what we really like synthetic division, because it's so much faster than doing the long division. So I don't know why I'm still in that purple that I switched to for the division problem. So look at number 7. The highest power is x to the 4th. So I'm going to make my box and put the coefficient for that term was a 2. The x cubed would go next. Well, there's not an x cubed. You have to put a 0. And there's where people mess up. If they leave out a term, you're going to get the wrong answer. So this is x cubed. The x squared term is a negative 3. The x term was 5. And the last term was negative 30. And it's x minus 2, so we divide by a positive 2. So the process, bring down the first term. There's a 2. Multiply those and put underneath the next term, 4. Add those together and bring down a 4. Multiply those two together and put underneath the next term. Add those two together. Multiply those two, put underneath the next term. Add those two together and get 15. Multiply those two and get 30. And negative 30 and positive 30, we get a remainder of 0. Since this was an x to the 4th problem originally, our answer is going to be, you put it with the 1 power less. So this will be 2x cubed plus 4x squared plus 5x plus 15. And if there had been a remainder, we'd say plus the remainder divided by the original term, or binomial that we were dividing by before. There's our answer to number 7. You could have done long division on that. If you don't like synthetic division, long division works. It's just slower. So for this one, we've got x cubed, x squared, x, and no x. So all the terms are there. So just list the coefficients. 4, negative 8, 7, negative 14. I'm going to show you another way you can do synthetic division. Some people would just put the synthetic division part in a box. So this is x minus, so we want a positive 1/2. And then you would write it like this, align and bring down. 4. 4 times 1/2 is 2. Negative 8 plus 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 times 1/2 is negative 3. 7 and negative 3, add those together and get 4. 4 times 1/2 is 2. And this time, the last number is the remainder, going to be a negative 12. This one, the remainder was not 0. So, since this was x cubed, this will be x squared. So our answer is 4x squared minus 6x and a positive 4. So plus 4. And then we have the remainder, so minus 12 divided by x minus 1/2. Okay, we've made it through 8 different dividing, either long dividing or synthetic dividing. Well, let's look at number 9. Is x plus 1 a factor? If it's a factor, the remainder will be 0. If it's not a factor, then you'll get a different number for a remainder. So we're going to do synthetic division, and I'm going to switch back to that other way of the box. You can do it either way. I've seen it written both ways. So this is x to the 6th would be a 1, because that's the highest power. 4x to the 5th. X to the 4th is 0. Negative 2x cubed. X squared is 0. X is 0. And the last term 7. So we make sure you don't leave any terms out, because if you do, you won't get the right answer. So we're dividing by, this is x plus 1, so we're going to divide by negative 1. Bring down the first term, multiply that and get negative 1. Add those together and get 3, multiply that and get negative 3. 0 plus negative 3 is negative 3, multiply that and get positive 3. 3 and negative 2 is a positive 1, 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Bring down 0 plus negative 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Add those together, multiply, and we get a remainder of 6. Since the remainder was not 0, no, x plus 1, didn't mean ignore the dot, x plus 1 is not a factor. It's not a factor. On your homework, it'd just be a yes-no answer, but no, it's not a factor. And the reason is, which you don't have to give the reason, but I want you to understand it, is because remainder not equal to 0. Okay. We're going to practice 2 more times, and then we're done with the notes. So, this one, look for the highest power, x squared. So 3 is going to go first. If x squared's first, x is next. So 7. X, and then the no x, so 2. And that's what goes here, so it's a short one we're doing. And we're dividing by x plus 2, which means we're dividing by a negative 2. Bring down the first term. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. 7 and negative 6 is 1. 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. So this one, we get a remainder of 0. So this was a factor. Since this was x squared, this is x to the first. So 3x plus 1, and you don't write the remainder when it's 0. So there's what you get when you divide. And the last one's out of order, because I see an x cubed and an x squared, and we're missing an x to the first term. So inside what we're dividing by, we put the coefficient of the largest term, which is a 1. Then the next term was a 3. Then the next term would be an x to the first, which isn't here. And the last term's a negative 4. And we're dividing by a positive 1 since it's already a minus. So bring down the first term of 1, multiply 1, add, multiply, add, multiply, add, get a remainder. The last box should always be the remainder. X cubed originally, so that makes this an x squared. So 1x squared is just x squared plus 4x plus 4. If you ever end up with, if the last one doesn't end up with a number, or you run out of x's too soon, then you probably messed up on putting your numbers down putting down your numbers first. So you should always end up with 1 power less here, Nope, I get the spinning wheel. One power less here, and then it keeps just going down from there. X squared x, no x. And there was no remainder, so there's our answer. And we're through with the notes.